Today I'm going to show you how I properly prepare a surface for oil paints, including how to deal with cracking and how to prevent it from happening in the future. For this video, I will be using a linen canvas from my sponsor, a linen specialist. You can use just about any surface with oil paint, including wood panels, canvas, paper, or even found objects. However, there are some things to keep in mind to make sure your oil paintings last as long as possible. The first thing you want to do is make sure that your surface is clean. If you're using a brand new surface like this one, then chances are it's already clean. But if you're reusing an old surface, then you may have to clean it before beginning. Let's take this old panel I've had since college, for example. It has been years since I've used this and I am not exactly sure what all it has been through, so I'll definitely want to clean it. To do so, I'm going to use a soft cloth with some mineral spirits. Mineral spirits will cut through most oils and they won't damage the structure of your painting surface. Now, once that's done, I'm going to wipe it down with a clean cloth and now it's ready to go. When preparing a surface, it's important to remember that oil paint doesn't stick well to slick surfaces. So if you were to paint directly onto these panels, the oil paints would have a hard time adhering and would probably end up flaking off within a few days. And that's why we use a primer. Primer gives the paint something to hold onto and helps it last longer. There are two main types of primer you can use with oils: oil-based primer and acrylic gesso. Oil-based primer is going to work very similarly to the way oil paint works. The pigment is suspended in oil medium and when it dries, it leaves a nice smooth finish that works really well with oil paints. Acrylic gesso, on the other hand, is made up of pigment and acrylic medium. It dries very quickly, almost instantly, and it has a chalky matte finish. I prefer to use acrylic gesso because it dries so fast. I can get several coats on in a short amount of time. I also like the matte finish because it diffuses the light and prevents any glare. This is especially important if you plan on veiling in your paintings. Veiling is a technique where you thin your oil paints with oil medium and then apply them thinly. Because the paint is so thin, it's much more translucent and you can see through to the layers underneath. If you're painting on a glossy surface, the light will reflect off the top layers and make it difficult to see through to the layers underneath. But if you prime with acrylic gesso, the matte finish will diffuse the light and make it much easier to see through to those layers. Now, there are some drawbacks to using acrylic gesso. Since the paint and the primer are water-based, you need to wait until the acrylic gesso has fully dried before applying any oil paints. And unlike oil-based primer, acrylic gesso isn't very flexible. When it cracks, it's going to crack again and never really fully heal like oil-based primer can. That being said, you can always go over acrylic gesso with oil medium to help seal it and make it more flexible. Let's get started priming this canvas. The first thing I'm going to do is tape off the edges. This is going to help keep the primer off the sides and help me get a nice clean edge. Next, I'm going to pour out a little bit of acrylic gesso onto the canvas. Then using a large brush like this, I'm going to spread it around until it covers the entire surface. I'm trying to be as careful as possible here to avoid creating any ripples or bumps. Once it's spread out, I am going to let it dry and then repeat the process until I have about 4 to 6 coats on. Once it's completely dry, I'm going to remove the tape and now it's ready for oil paints. One thing you might notice about this panel is that it's slightly concave in the middle. As you start to add more layers of paint, this will become less noticeable, but it's something you should keep in mind if you plan on painting on a large scale. Also, this panel has been through quite a lot in the past 20 years. There are several areas where it's cracked. This is known as crazing. Crazing is purely aesthetic and doesn't affect the structural integrity of the painting. In fact, older paintings are often prized more highly for their crazing because it adds character and shows the age of the piece. That being said, there are several things you can do to stop crazing in its tracks or even reverse it. To fix these cracks, I'm going to use this two-part epoxy specifically made for paintings. This stuff is amazing and all you need is a small amount to repair large damaged areas. First, I'm going to squeeze out a bit of each part and mix them together using a toothpick. Then I'm going to take a small brush and dip it into the mixture. Using small dabbing motions, I'm going to fill in the cracks. Allow the epoxy to cure for the recommended time, and once it's fully cured, you're good to go. To prevent crazing in the future, there are two things you can do. The first is to add more oil medium to your paints. This will make your paints thinner and more flexible. The second option is to apply your paints more thickly. The thicker your paint layers are, the more flexible they will be. Just remember, oils take a very long time to dry. Adding more oil medium or applying thicker paint layers means that your paintings will take longer to be touch dry. And if you try to speed up the process by using a heat gun or hairdryer, you risk scorching the oils and ruining the painting. Now that the panel is primed and the cracks are repaired, it's ready to paint. One thing to note about these linen canvases is that the weave of the linen is fairly loose. If you zoom in, you can actually see the individual threads that make up the fabric. This looseness allows for a lot of flexibility, which is great for oils, but it can cause problems with larger paintbrushes. Larger brushes tend to catch on the loose threads and can cause the fabric to ripple. To avoid this, I recommend using smaller brushes whenever possible. Another thing to consider is how you store your finished paintings. Oils are very sensitive to temperature and humidity changes, which can cause the paintings to expand and contract. This stress can eventually cause the oils to crack. To prevent this, you want to keep your paintings away from direct sunlight and heat sources. You should also keep them out of humid environments like bathrooms and basements. I like to store my paintings flat in a climate-controlled environment. And that's it. That's how I prepare a surface for oil paints. Now I'm gonna get started on this week's oil painting. Every Friday I post a new oil painting tutorial on this channel, and every Sunday I finish it during my live streams. If you liked this video, check out this one next.